Welcome to the Daily Dog podcast for Thursday. This is Game Week 1, Thursday podcast. This is our second podcast of the week. In our first podcast, we took a look at Marshall. We broke down the game a little bit, looked at Marshall, who they are, what they have been the last couple of years, what we can expect from them this year. We took a look at what we can expect from Georgia. We laid out sort of a checklist of things that we want to see. I mean, of course, you always want to see many of the things we listed. We talked about wanting to see Gunnar Stockton settle in and play well, be out of the game by halftime or the third quarter so other guys can get in there and play. We want to see over 500 yards offense, good balance on both sides of the ball. You'd look at all that list and you'd say, well, you want that in every game. And of course you want that in every game. Playing a perfect game is always your goal. But specifically, given where the team is right now in terms of development, starting with a new quarterback really starting in his first home game, regular season game in front of the Sanford Stadium crowd and fans, we have some goals that we want to see, and we didn't accomplish some of the things that we're used to seeing, like stopping the run and running the ball really well last year. So this is an opportunity for the new offensive line, the new quarterback, the running back group to go out there and establish themselves, and we want to see them hit certain benchmarks. So that's something we're going to be watching for because, we know the game is not going to be super competitive, but we want to see, in addition to just the joy and the excitement of seeing Georgia take the field and the sights and the sounds that come with a packed house in Sanford Stadium, in addition to that, we want to see certain things so that we can begin to get a sense of what this team is and what this team can be. So right now, what we want to do, though, is turn our attention and take a look at, and what this podcast is really about, is taking a look at where is Georgia in the national perception, the local perception, the SEC. Where do we feel as fans Georgia is right now coming into the new season? So let's start with sort of the obvious things, and I'm sure you guys have looked at all these things, but let's just summarize it. Let's just recap here real quick and say where we are. We are ranked 5th in the AP poll and 4th in the coaches poll. And I guess in the real world nowadays, the coaches poll really just gets traction for a week or 10 days because it comes out in the preseason before the AP poll. So it's the only poll we have to look at. And then once the AP poll comes out, we basically just follow that until we get to the playoff poll, and then we start following that. So once the season's ongoing, though, I guess not very many of us spend that much time talking about the coaches poll. I guess it's interesting that it still exists out there because it really doesn't get a lot of traction. But nonetheless, I bring it up to say we are ranked 5th in the AP poll, and we have 1 first place vote. In the coaches poll, we're ranked 4th, and we had 3 first place votes. So going back to the AP poll, other teams receiving votes. So in first place, Texas is number 1, Penn State's number 2, Ohio State number 3, Clemson number 4, Notre Dame 6 behind us at 5, Oregon 7, Alabama 8, LSU 9, and Miami 10. So that's your top 10 the AP poll. There are 6 teams that got first place votes in the AP poll. Texas got the most at 25, just behind them Penn State with 23, Ohio State with 11, Clemson with 4, we had 1, and Oregon down at 7 had 1. So that's how the first place votes were divided. So Texas is number 1, but they're a fairly narrow number 1, just 2 first place votes ahead of Penn State. Ohio State got 11. Which I think is kind of a lot, but there's always a certain deference paid to the defending national champion. Over in the coaches poll, just for perspective, Texas had 28 first place votes. Ohio State came in 2nd and Penn State 3rd, so they flipped the order there. Ohio State got 20 first place votes, and the coaches are always more likely to pay deference to last year's champion. They sort of, you hear a lot of them dig into that old school idea that a team is champion until they've been knocked off. So even though we know in college football, more so than in the pros, you really rebuild the team every year. Every year is a brand new addition. We scrub the records and start over. Last year's team was last year's team. This year's team is something different. So we don't, they sometimes get called defending champions, but the way this plays out, they're not. They're not really the defending champion. So, but Texas, 28 first place votes in the coaches poll, Ohio State 20, Penn State 14. We had three, and then Clemson had two. So, that lays out, sitting right there in fifth or sixth place, depending on which poll you're looking at, is Notre Dame. Clemson's in fourth in the AP poll. So let's just narrow this in a little bit. We're jumping around all over the place. But let's just go back to the AP poll and look at that and say, okay, so Texas is number one, Penn State's number two, Ohio State's number three. Texas and Penn State, though, are divvying up the majority of the votes between them. And then Ohio State gets a chunk, and then Clemson, us, and Oregon get a few votes each. So um, this is a different place for Georgia. The last 3 to 5 years, we've been number one, number two, number three almost all the time. We had a long run at number one, and that was glorious and exciting, and I think we all enjoyed that. It was rarefied air and something most Georgia fans didn't get to see a lot in their lifetime. You had to go back um, to the Herschel days, the glory days, 1980, 1981, 82, 83, to find a time where we played so well on the field and were rewarded with hanging out in the top of the poll consistently. Um, so all of a sudden now we're still in the top five. That's a lot of respect, but you can really see from the way the votes are distributed that people are looking at Texas, Penn State, then they think maybe Ohio State's got a chance, and people even think Clemson has four first place votes to us having five or one, I mean, and being in fifth place, and they're in fourth. So um, that's a different story. I mean, basically what the national media there in the AP poll is saying is they're saying, look, Georgia's still an incredibly talented team, um, and we are. I think by any index, you look at our recruiting profiles, you look at the summation of talent that's on the team that's still there even after having so many people go pro over the last 2 or 3 years, and our roster, Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, those are still your most talented rosters. Um, and so I think that's what people are kind of looking at. I think another way of saying is maybe people are saying, well, Georgia has the puncher's chance in that the setup doesn't look like it has been. They're not the dominant and obvious team that they were. They've lost a lot of key people, and they have a lot of unproven people. And I think that's a fair perception of us. So, but based on talent alone, we're right there behind those other favorites. So, how does that connect with the SEC media? Who's got a little tighter look at it. In the SEC media days, I'm sure many of you saw this, and it's been covered, by people back in July. But just to recap real quick, Texas was picked to win the SEC, 96 first place votes to Georgia getting 44, and then Bama and LSU essentially splitting 29 and 20 each. So you got really three tiers there in four teams. You got Texas way out in front, twice as far ahead in votes as Georgia. And then Georgia's twice as far ahead as basically Bama and LSU combined. They're kind of divvying up the next batch. So you got Texas by itself, Georgia number two by itself, and then sort of a split like, well, if we go to a third team there, it could be Bama or LSU. And that's what the SEC media people came up with. So, so we're not expected to win the SEC. We're not the favorite in the SEC this year, despite being the reigning champs. Texas is the favorite, and Texas is number one in most of the national media's eyes coming into the season. So, um, some of us might bristle at that a little bit and say, well, hey, we beat Texas. And, you'd be right. We did beat Texas twice last year. Texas is not the defending SEC championship or champion team. That's Georgia. So why are we behind them? Well, again, a lot of it has to do with roster. But I think a key to look at with all these teams is that everybody's got some flaws. Everybody, we talked about that a little bit in yesterday's podcast, but Texas lost some of their linemen and lost some of their defensive people, and they do have some of those next guys stepping up in the front seven and defense. They've still got the running back duo that they had last year, and they got Arch Manning, who for all the hype, it's been well documented now. You got all the hype, but a lot of people are also giving the rebuttal and saying, yeah, but he's only started a couple games, and that's true. So, um, but he certainly has talent. I mean, look, we wanted him. Uh, and we recruited hard. The paint line guys famously, painted themselves in or saying we want Arch, and we all wanted Arch. We were excited about it. It came down to us in Texas. Alabama got eliminated in the final three, and it was us in Texas, and he went to Texas. And ironically, he waited behind Quinn Ewers for 2 years, and now his chance to start. And here we are with our questions about Gunnar Stockton, but it would be Arch Manning or Gunnar Stockton right now as the duo, taking the field. And maybe in your mind you say, well, that's no contest. Arch Manning would be starting. Well, I mean, again, it would have been interesting to see, but he would have had the same opportunity at this point to step in and be the guy for the first time now as he did by going to Texas. So I don't think that's what it was all about. He always seemed willing to, he wasn't looking for the place where he could go start the quickest or the path was the most obvious. He liked what was presented at Texas for one reason or another, and he chose that. But it is ironic and interesting to think about the fact that he would be stepping in right now. And I think right now the national and your fan perspective of Georgia might be a little bit different if Arch Manning was about to step up and be the starter this year for Georgia. Um, he's got the hype, and that gives Texas that perspective. And something I started talking a little bit about in yesterday's podcast, and I want to get back to though while we're talking about where we are and where the other teams around us are, is Penn State. I started down this path and I didn't really finish the thought, which was to say that Penn State is the team right now that looks like what it takes to be a national champion. And since we won our last national championship, which was just um, 2 complete seasons ago, meaning we were 2021 and 2022, and now we've had the 23 champion, the 24 champions. 23 champion was Michigan, 24 champion was Ohio State. Well, Georgia is really a continuation. Alabama was champion before us in 20. And then in 19, it was LSU. And so you had LSU and then Bama and then Georgia and then Georgia and now Michigan, Ohio State. And so I would say that the LSU, Bama, and Georgia teams were all much more alike in how they were constructed than as champion than Michigan and Penn State. I mean, Michigan, Ohio State, and now Penn State are coming into this season. And what that is what I mean by that is those teams, Michigan was really not, though they had a bunch of guys drafted, they did not have a lot of elite guys. They didn't have what Georgia had coming out of the 21 and 22 championships, where we had, several guys in the first round and just a litany of guys first, second, and third round. They had guys, they had dudes, and they were and the NFL, and I think they had, I don't remember what it was, 12 to 14 guys drafted. Not as many as the record 15 that Georgia had. But they had a bunch of guys drafted, and then they had another bunch of guys, make it as undrafted free agents. So maybe 20 guys off of that Michigan team ended up starting off in the pros somewhere. I haven't followed them, and I don't know where they are now. But that's what happened there. And then um, and a lot of those guys were NFL guys because they were at Michigan a long time. They developed and they became guys with experience. They became guys who were veterans, who knew what they were doing, who'd done the work in the weight room and on the field to learn their craft and form their bodies into being NFL players. And so those guys came together. They stuck around. They a lot of them stayed an extra year when they could have gone pro, and they came back, and they were a big veteran group, and they won the national championship. And then last year, Ohio State did the same thing. Ohio State got some transfers like Caleb Downs that they were able to steal away from Alabama and us. We were in the running for that, I think, but in the end, I think on the money side, it was a no contest. And they got some, so they brought in some portal guys, and they brought in some new recruits. like Jeremiah Smith, the freshman all world wide receiver, but um, and they brought in Will Howard, obviously from Kansas State, who was their quarterback last year. So they dipped into the transfer portal, but they also convinced their front seven on defense, a bunch of dudes there that were really strong defenders. They convinced their running back group. They convinced these guys to stick around and to come back and run it back and play one more year, and it worked out. It almost didn't work out. They kind of limped into the playoff, and fan base was pretty upset from a four straight loss to Michigan. But then they get on a run, and they were just dominant in the four games of the playoff, and they won the national championship. And so it worked. And so this reminds me of what I grew up watching in college football, was that teams very rarely went on multi-year runs of winning a national championship. Usually what happened is you had to have a great coach, and you had to have a team with pedigree and opportunity, and it always brought in talent. And then if that team got some special players, a la Herschel Walker in 1980, 1981, 82, if you had a great quarterback, and that guy got a couple years of experience, and then you got just the right cagey group of veterans and people around him, then that team would go on a run and go through maybe an undefeated season and win a national championship. And then everybody would run out of eligibility or go pro, and that team would go back to being a 6-6 team the next year, and it would take them a couple years to build up. You couldn't expect to go back to back to back and being in the hunt for titles all the time. That just didn't happen very often. You usually had to go through a cycle every few years to build back up to having a team. And it looks like right now in the NIL and portal world, that one of the big changes that's happened is you go. So I was alluding to how LSU, Alabama, and Georgia, those last four SC or national champions before Michigan and Ohio State, those teams looked a lot more. That was the Nick Saban model, and the model that Kirby used and even LSU used, which was to recruit and bring in overwhelming talent, have 2 and 3 dudes at every position that you can just rotate in and just bury people. Not just with great coaching and great development, which Alabama, Georgia had. LSU maybe not so much, but also just overwhelming talent. Just, we're just better than you at every position, and so is the second guy. And that was the foundation of how those teams are built. And in the NIL portal era, it doesn't really look like teams can amass that kind of talent anymore. You just can't afford it. You are going to have to allocate a certain amount of money, and to your team, and you got so much for certain positions, and you're not going to be able to do that. But you have seen some schools step up, and that's what Ohio State did last year. Michigan did before that. They put a little extra money on the table and said, look, let's keep some of these guys around and make a run. And so all of a sudden, it's kind of like a throwback to the old days. So all of that is to say, Penn State looks like this year's version of that. You look at Texas. Texas got a new quarterback. They got some key guys back, but they lost some guys, and they're more about their upcoming talent. They're a little bit more like the Georgia and Alabama teams for a few years ago, where they did have talent stacked on talent, and they lost some guys, but the next guys up might even be better. And so they're in reload mode, but that puts a lot of questions out there. Ohio State did go for it, and it worked. And most of those key guys, especially on defense, are gone, and their defensive coordinator's gone. And so, and the quarterback that they brought in is gone, and the running back room that they kept together is gone. So they still have Jeremiah Smith, and they still have Caleb Downs, like I mentioned yesterday. And people keep saying, hey, those are probably the two best players in all of college football, and that's probably true. But like I said, a wide receiver and a safety can't dominate a team to a championship. That doesn't happen that way. Those guys can't make that kind of impact. So they can be the guys that can make the play that changes a close game. If they get into the playoff and it comes down to a play here or a play there, I'd certainly rather have Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith than a lot of people to go to in those situations. And the fact that they have one on offense, one on defense, maybe they'll make that play, whatever that play is at ease. Maybe they make both. Maybe Jeremiah Smith gets the go-ahead touchdown in a critical game, and then Caleb Downs seals the game with an interception. Maybe that's going to happen for Ohio State if they get there. But they're going to need a lot of other people to step up and develop around that, and they lost a ton of talent. And so, like us, they're still, you when you look at a talent index, Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama are probably still the most talented, and Texas now maybe. Those are still your most talented teams. They have a talent gap on everybody else. But again, a lot of unproven. New quarterback, new running back, new defensive front. So new defensive coordinator. So Ohio State's got a lot to prove and rebuild there. They've got the talent and they can do it. And then that's where we are. Everybody looks at us. That's why we're fifth. But we're and being fifth with one first place vote probably shows you that people have a lot more confidence in. Well, I think Ohio State gets the recency bias, to be honest, because I don't have any reason to. I mean, Justin saying who's going to get the start at quarterback for them, is probably an excellent talent. I mean, Alabama wanted him. We wanted him. He ended up, he went to Alabama and then left when Saban retired, and he ended up at Ohio State. Now it's going to be his turn. But I don't, he's barely played any football. So we have no idea what to expect from him. And there's no reason for me to believe he's going to light the world up, better than Gunnar Stockton or any other guy out there, right? So, Arch Manning, again, a little bit, even though he hasn't really started a lot of games, a little bit more of a known commodity, and we have seen him in some games. We've seen him in critical games. He played against Georgia last year, and what was, they wanted to have a championship season. We wanted to have a championship season. Those were two teams that were in that position. They both played for the SEC championship. He was in those games, but he was not a difference maker, Arch Manning. But but guys develop, and so we expect him to develop. And so again, that's where we are. As you look at our team, and I kind of alluded this to yesterday too. We hadn't had the kind of defensive line production last year that we're used to. People were able to run up the middle on us, and I mean, it's not like we got gashed for 400 yards a game left and right, but we're used to seeing holding teams on average to being in the top five nationally on yards per play. Rushing defense, and we were like 30th or something. So it's a big difference. And so and some of the guys who are our best guys or have been there the longest, those guys are gone. So it's not, we need new guys to step up out of our talent base and restore the tradition of being a wall on the defensive front that doesn't let people run on us. Offensive line, that was the third year in a row we had a group that maybe was the Joe Moore Offensive Line Award winning candidates coming into the season. It was thought to, and we did have three or four guys that have gone pro off that line. So from last year, and so you look at it and you say this should have been one of the best offensive line, if not the best offensive line in the country, and they played well. I mean, especially in pass defense. I mean, Carson Beck was rarely in a lot of trouble, and but we didn't open up holes and we didn't run well. I mean, that could be on the running backs, that could be on the injuries, but that line should have been so good that you or I could have jumped out of the stands with the ball and gained 5 yards a carry, right? I mean, that's what we thought. And while they were pretty solid at pass defense, they were not. They were never able to exert their will and just say we're running the ball now. Come hell or high water, and that was a hallmark of those championship teams that Georgia had. So we need to see our offensive line establish itself with new guys. We need to see our defensive line establish itself with new guys. We need to see our quarterback establish himself as a guy who can make plays and get a team in position to win a title. The running back room needs a comeback year, if nothing else, just by being healthy. Everybody feels good about the additions to our wide receiving core with Zachariah Branch, Noah Thomas, Colby Young being back, plus guys like Dylan Bell that were still there, plus all of our tight ends like Delp and Lucky, and the new guys we brought in. So, I mean, we look to have overwhelming talent in the receiving core. But again, these are a group of people who didn't break off a lot of big plays last year and dropped a ton of balls. And so, so they've got to prove it. So as I go through the thing, it's like you say, okay, yeah, well, we have this great talent, but I just listed basically, if you guys out there are fans or watch the movie, How to Train Your Dragon and the original or the new remake, the live action remake that just came up. In my family, everybody likes the quote from where the Hiccup character says, "You just you just gestured to all of me. So that's how I feel when I'm talking about what we need to see step up with our team, right? I just gestured to the whole team, like they all need to step up and prove it. So, but that the Ohio State's in the same boat, and Texas is maybe halfway there, and so then who else is there? Who else are we looking at? Well, Penn State. Penn State is that team that they put some money out there. They kept people. Drew Aller, the quarterback, could have gone pro. And look, I'm not going to tell you I know all the guys on Penn State. I don't, but I know just from what people are saying, and I can see from the experience that they bring back that they have a lot of guys. They are sort of that veteran, senior laden team, or maybe not even senior laden team, but just veteran laden team. And one thing I can look at, I referenced Phil Steele puts together a lot of great stats. And a lot of people look at this and do different indexes about like offensive line starts and stuff like this. But Phil still has an index that he uses where he talks about, where he shows the returning production. And just taking a look at Penn State. Penn State is on his index, they rank 27th in returning production, but specifically, Penn State has 70, almost 73% of their offensive yard gain people are their offensive yard makers coming back. And on defense, they got almost 50% of their tacklers back. And offensive line has like 83 career starts. So anything over 100 is usually pretty good. I mean, you think about that, you got five guys across the offensive line, and they can be there 4 years. And so, but usually guys don't start for really good teams when they're freshmen. So, so if you see 100+ starts, that's like each of the five guys has got like 20 starts to their name. And so that's pretty good. So Penn State's in the 83 category. So compare that to Ohio State. Ohio State only has 26% of their returning offensive yardage coming back. And as far as on defense, their tacklers, they only have 45% of those. Offensive line, they also have about 85 starts. So they're a little better on line maybe than we are. You take a look at us. We have 34% of our yardage guys coming back on offense and almost 48% of our defense. So that's not bad. But offensive line looks a little scary. We only have 35 starts. Now, we got a lot of guys that have played a lot of time and have rotated in and we're not starters. So we got guys with experience, but still only 35 starts coming into the year with our offensive line. And so on Phil Steele's talent returning index, or not talent, but returning index, we're like 102 compared to Penn State being 27. Ohio State's like 105. Texas is like 85. So, and then the other team that's just kind of sitting there right up in that top four, the old an old backyard I hate orange rival of ours, Clemson. They're kind of, people have started writing Dabo Swinney off and his non-portal stance and his outdated recruiting tactics, and but he also has got a team that's basically a pretty veteran team. Their quarterback is back and in like his third year. You look at offensive yardage; they got 80% of their yardage coming back on offense and 74% of their tacklers coming back. On offensive line, they have 135 starts. That's a very experienced team coming back, and they're talented. Dabo does know talent. So on that Phil Steele index, Clemson's number 2 overall. I mean, they're very experienced. So and Clemson has a huge advantage because they're playing in the ACC. So we don't know if Florida State's going to be any good. I think they got to be better than they were last year, right? But I still don't think they're going to be very good. I think of them as probably being mid this year. Miami, who knows? Miami could be top 5. Miami could be top 15. I don't think there'll be any. I think that's their. I think they're. I don't see them as elite. I mean, I think under the right circumstances, they could get in the conversation to make a run. But I don't see them as coming out and just claiming the top spot with dominance this season. And I also don't see them falling any more than like to 15th. I mean, I don't see them falling apart either. I mean, I think they're going to be right there. So Clemson, is looking at Miami as really the only team that's probably a significant threat to them. So they've got a favorable schedule. They got a lot of experience back, and they've got a very experienced quarterback who put up a ton of yards. I mean, outside of the game against us in the first game of the year, where he couldn't throw the ball past his ear hole. Um, After that, they started putting up offense all over the place later in the season. So he looks like a world beater coming back, and with third, fourth year of experience. So Cade Klubnik. Um, so they got a veteran quarterback. They got some new wide receivers like we do that people are happy about. They got a lot of experience on offensive line. They've got a salty defense, and they've always been strong on defense. So, uh, you know, we can talk more about that later. But Clemson's legit, and then Penn State, is the other one. So those two teams are your teams that are kind of your new era, and by new era, last two season style champions. Teams that have convinced a group of guys to stick together and not all run off to the NFL and bring anywhere from 2 to 4 years of experience onto the field and bring it all together and with a veteran quarterback and see what they can get done. Penn State's got running backs and a quarterback. Got pretty good defense. They're solid play all around, um, and they got a new defensive coordinator, but it's the guy who put together the Ohio State defense and got them, in the right position last year. So the other two teams I hadn't really mentioned out there in this discussion of where we stand and where the other teams by comparison would be Notre Dame and Alabama. I mean, there's other teams. I haven't talked about Oregon much, but I think they're just a nice team that's going to be in the top 10, but I don't see them as important. LSU, I guess, just to speak on that, I already said my piece about Miami, and so I think they're right where they need to be at number 10, and we'll see. And LSU, I'm just going to leave LSU in the prove it category, right? I mean, I think LSU is where I think frustratingly a lot of us used to hear the media talking about us, but Georgia a few years ago, like good team, a lot of talent, but hadn't been able to get over the hump, makes the big mistake, blows it in the big game. Hell, they hadn't even been able to not lose the first game in like two coaches in 5, 6, 8 years or whatever it is. I mean, so and yet again they've got a tough opener. They're playing Clemson um, right off the bat in this opener. So the battle of who's the real Death Valley, right? Um, so they're playing Clemson at Clemson to start. So I mean, gosh, that's tough. I mean, they have a strong chance of starting the year with yet again, 0-1 to start the season. So, but even outside of that, I mean, they can rebound from that loss, and it's not going to kill them if they lose a close game at Clemson to Clemson. I mean, Clemson's going to be there all year, so they're not going to lose a lot of ground on that. That's not going to hurt them, but it's just going to leave them in that prove it category. I'm with that. I'm not calling LSU out as anything until we see them. So Clemson and Penn State are your veteran teams that look like what the championship team all of a sudden looks like the last 2 years with the open portal and the NIL world. And we all wondered what those would do. And of course, what a lot of people wanted NIL and portal to do is to make the little team, competitive with the big team. And there's some of that. I mean, Vanderbilt, right? Going 7-6 and beating Alabama last year. Definitely teams can, make a sudden splash and be competitive because of the portal. But really, what I think you're seeing, and this is probably good for the sport, honestly, is that Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State to some degree are not able to stockpile that overwhelming talent anymore. You can't afford to keep guys, 3D. You can't have Jordan Davis starting and Jalen Carter on the bench behind him, and then waiting 2 or 3 seasons, before he goes pro. You just and it's not. I mean, some of it is loyalty, and are the guys willing to do that? But some of it is just money. They're just going to be offered so much money to be the guy. And look, we can only pay. So if you got Jordan Davis, he costs X amount. Like there's this much NIL and roster money is going to have to go to that position, right? A guy like that, who's completely absolutely necessary on the defensive line. And so it's going to be hard to have a Jordan Davis and a Jalen Carter, because if you allocate that much money to two guys in that one position, then you're basically taking some of that money from some other position on the field, right? So now maybe you don't have as good offensive line, or you don't have as good a wide receivers, or so. So again, you're not gonna see it. I mean, we still recruit at an elite level, and we still have more talent assembled than others, but we're not in that position now like we were, where you had, the teams where we got a guy like Jalen Walker who, or I mean, just who's behind, like Mikael Williams got all the pub last year, and Jalen Walker still ends up going in the first round. And yeah, we did. I mean, I guess that's not a good example because they were both on the team last year. But again, behind them, we don't really have a lot of pass rush right now. And we had Gabe Harris, and he transferred. He looked like the next guy coming up, and I don't know why he transferred because he was in position to be the guy, except for maybe he was guaranteed more money to be the guy over at Missouri. Again, I don't know. We don't. Nobody publishes the numbers on these, but I think it. I think that's what we see now is all of a sudden the change in the last couple of years is that the portal hasn't, and the NIL has definitely done one good thing for college football, which it's spreading the talent around a little bit. Even though I love being the beneficiary of having overwhelming talent and just crushing people on the field, I think we can all say it's probably better for the sport if two or three teams don't have all the talent and are just unbeatable. And that's what we have right now. That's the field right now. That's where Georgia is. That's the perspective we're trying to look at. Say, hey, right now, instead of Georgia being the dominant team, Georgia's a team that could win, and Texas is number one. But they're splitting votes with Penn State and Ohio State and Clemson and us, and nobody really stands out as the team because nobody can have that veteran quarterback and then bring in all just those dudes, right? And even as we're talking about Penn State and Clemson looking like that team, it's worth noting they're a lot more like Michigan. Like Ohio State really was an all-star team last year. I mean, they probably underachieved in the previous couple of years, and they underachieved last season, putting themselves in the position of losing to Michigan and not even winning their playing in their conference championship game. Um, but then they rebounded and dominated the playoff. But that's because they had that team and they held on to those guys just long enough to finally get the benefit of having overwhelming talent. But now those guys have graduated out and they're like us. They still have a ton of talent, but they're not three deep at every position anymore. So and these guys don't have a ton of experience, so they're gonna have to bring in new guys. And that's where we are. And so Penn State, yeah, they got a bunch of veteran guys, but it's also worth noting none of these guys. I mean, Drew Aller's a great quarterback. I mean, at running back, they're probably got guys that any team in the country would take. Um, and they've improved their tight ends and receivers. They maybe have a little more playmakers. Their defense across the board is decent, but I don't think there's very many guys that, if you're just choosing raw talent or recruiting and saying, hey, I want this guy, that Georgia would have. Penn State's not full of guys that Georgia wishes that they had or Ohio State wishes they had. They're just full of guys who are NFL ready who chose not to go, and and that's what Michigan had too. That's what I was saying before. Their talent index was not really that high. It was more about guys who can make the NFL who didn't, and it stayed for that extra year. And Ohio State was both. Ohio State was sort of overwhelming talent, higher level guys, but also who stayed. Um, and then they were able to get it done. And Clemson's probably closer. I mean, they have true talent across the board that you'd look at and say on defense and offensive line and with the quarterback and but still not that many guys that are just number top five, top 10 draft picks. So neither Penn State nor Clemson have that, but they are stacked with those experienced guys. And so, not maybe elite talent, but stacked with experienced guys. You got a couple teams there. Then you got the teams that have elite talent, but not a lot of experience. And so it's a big jumbled mess. And this is, I think, what people want to see is a more wide open field, and it is more wide open. It's not more wide open for like um, I don't know. I'm trying to think of I mean, like Kansas State. Kansas State was ranked. They lost their opening game in Ireland last weekend, but I don't think it's open to the extent that Kansas State is. I mean, Kansas State or Iowa State, sure, they could make the playoff, but realistically, they don't have the talent to win 4 games like Ohio State did last year. I mean, Ohio State won those 4 games and looked dominant doing it because once they got there and they put it in gear, they had overwhelming talent. So, um, and so they got the right set of everything together. So I mean, a team like Iowa State or Kansas State or Arizona State. These guys might make the playoff. They might be a nice story, but they're not going to win. They don't have that. And the other thing I think that is kind of funny, the portal did, and I made mention of this, I think, also yesterday in the podcast, but I'll just emphasize it again, is what you can see is you can see an entire good team move to a new location. You got a hot coach, and you had a couple good players and some good schemes and a lot of good things that were going right at New Mexico State a couple of years ago. They were good enough that they were able to come in and beat a mediocre Auburn team at home, but that's still a big statement. I mean, the best New Mexico State team should not beat a mediocre Auburn team at home, but they did. And Clark Lee saw that at Vanderbilt, and like we talked about, and he said, "Hey, sign me up." And we're seeing that happen all over the place now, where a coach moves to a new school, and his quarterback and his offensive coach and some of his other coaches come with him, and a whole slew of players come with him, and that team, maybe, that obviously if they brought a new coach and new people, they were down and out, right? So the coach comes in and he brings a bunch of people with him, and they suddenly leap from being 1-11 to bowl game, and everybody's like, wow. But that's still not that's not rebalancing all of college football. That's just moving. In some ways, it's kind of a little sad for those smaller teams. I mean, a team like a New Mexico State can basically guarantee that if you do happen to find that next young, hot, up and coming coach, and he gets some guys excited, and they come there and they play, and they make something happen on the field, and if you get noticed and like the media realizes you're there, well, then you're going to lose that coach, those players, and that guy next year. They're all going to go to some other team. So, and then all of a sudden that team's going to be better. So it's still sort of a zero sum game. The talent's just shuffling around, right? So we've taken what had become a model at the top of college football, where teams like Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State were just amassing huge talent and had just distanced themselves from everybody else. Well, now we're spreading that talent around a little bit more in the top 10, and the field's gotten a little more wide open in the top 10. It's not wide open 1 from 25. I mean, it's almost even. I used to really revel in being excited, when Georgia was in the days when we were outside the top 25, and then we'd win maybe their first 3 or 4 games. I'd check the poll every week to see if we're moving into the top 25, right? As a fan now, spending time at the top like we have, I realize that the gap between 1, 2, and 3, and say 8 and 9 is often huge, and the gap between 8 and 9 and say 20th or 17th is also huge. I mean, you're looking at teams that are in the quote unquote top 25, but realistically have no real chance to be factors in the national championship or the playoff in terms of really, like, oh, this team's going to get on a run and make it there. So I'm just looking at the bottom of our top 25, some teams that were nice stories last year, maybe this year. 16 SMU, 17 Kansas State, 20 Indiana, 22 Iowa State. They'll move up. So Iowa State and Kansas State probably flip places, because when they do put out a new ranking, they didn't do a ranking for just a handful of teams that played. So when those teams play this weekend, and then the rankings come out next week, they'll probably flip spaces because Iowa State beat Kansas State in the game in Ireland. But Boise State. So these teams down at the bottom, I mean, look, they're great stories, and again, they might make the playoff, but like we saw with SMU last year, I mean, SMU was in the playoff, but they weren't really super competitive. You didn't expect them to be, and they weren't. Indiana, everybody poked all at their schedule, and how soft it was, and it was, but they made the playoff, but they were not competitive. I mean, they wouldn't have beaten hardly any other team in the playoff. So it's a nice story, but it's not you're not really, this playoff and this portal and spreading the money around isn't really spreading the wealth up and down college football where 1 through 25 has a real shot. It has made the top 5 or 10 or 8 more open, and it has allowed teams to essentially steal another team and just move the good vibes from one place to another. But you're not just bringing more talent up and down football in there. So anyway, this is a wide perspective saying where does Georgia stand, and you heard it in all that. We are at the bottom of the top 5 contenders. We're fifth in a group of these 5 teams could win. So why are we there? And I think the answer is that's an indictment. And I think we'll do a whole podcast maybe tomorrow talking about Gunner, and let's break down who Gunner is and what we really think could happen here. Where did he come from? What do we really think about him? And I think it is an interesting comparison. I brought up the whole Gunner and Arch Manning thing because they are basically, we brought both. They would have been competing for the spot right now if Arch had come to Georgia, and so. But basically, fifth, yes, all those other parts of our team need to prove it. But for instance, when you go back and you look at the SEC media stuff, we have 4 guys on defense on the first team defense, all SEC first team defense preseason, right? So people, even though there's a bunch of guys that haven't proven it yet, you got guys that the media is already saying this guy's a stud. He's going to step up and he's a future top 3 round draft pick at Georgia. So really, it comes down to, and I've heard a lot of people say it, like Reese Davis on the Game Day podcast at ESPN. I've read through the ESPN people. I read through the stuff at the people at the Athletic. Everybody where they've ranked. You had 20 or more of their staff writers and people get together and say, who do you think what? And the overwhelming answer keeps coming back to that basically people don't believe in Gunner, and they're not saying he's no good. They just don't believe like they do in Arch Manning, who also has very limited um, time on the field and hasn't really proved it yet either. But they look at him and they think that he has the deliverables. Like he looks like a future NFL first rounder, and he looks like an elite quarterback. And of course, he's got the name, right? And so people believe in Texas because they believe in Arch, and they don't really believe in Georgia, other than the fact that they say well, Georgia's just so talented, you never know. But basically, what they're saying is, I don't really believe in Gunner. Stockton, I mean, they have enough talent to be, a national title team. So let's see what happens. And as fans, we're in the same boat. We can't say otherwise. We don't know for sure what Gunner will or won't be. I think we can talk about that a little bit before the season starts, and I think we'll do that tomorrow. But um, but I do think that I think that's where we are. That's our perception is. Look, we could win the SEC. We're the second best choice for that. Um, we could win the national title, or we're certainly making. And every projection I've seen, nobody has us winning the national championship. I haven't seen us. I've seen people put us all the way into the final and losing in the final when they go ahead and project all the way through. And I consistently see us. Not only are we ranked fifth to start the season, but almost everybody I've seen map out a playoff projection has put us as the fifth seed. So again, they expect us basically to be the top at large seed. Like, so Texas, in that scenario, they're saying, look, Texas can win the SEC. Texas will get the top seed out of the SEC. But Georgia is going to basically be your number 1 at large team. They're not going to win the SEC, but they're still going to be a top 5 team. They're going to be your fifth seed. And they're going to, and most people think we'd probably win a game or two in the playoff. But nobody seems to think that we win out and win the title. And again, I think it just comes back to they don't, when you start looking at the matchups and you get down the road and you project to the end, you say, well, it could be Georgia and Penn State, or Georgia and Texas, or Georgia and Ohio State, or Clemson. In every one of those scenarios, I think they're going to look at the other quarterback and say they believe in that guy, at least right now to start the season. They believe in that guy more than they believe in us, our guy. So, we talked about what's going to happen. It's going to be, there's not going to be an easy chance to change that perspective. I mean, we got Marshall this week, Austin P next week, and then we go to Tennessee. So the first real chance before we're going to change anything about how people feel about us, we as fans get to see the team take the field, and we get to see them get comfortable, and hopefully gel as a team in these first two games. But we and the rest of the world isn't really going to know what we've got as far as a competitor until we go to Tennessee. Now, we should outclass Tennessee. It's a little early to break that one down, but right now I feel pretty good about thinking of that as a game that we should win, even though we're going to be going on the road. And we'll talk about that more later. But till we get to there, we don't have anything that people are going to look at and change their perspective. And even then, that might not change their perspective. It might not change until or unless um, we beat Alabama. And I want to talk about that too. So a couple other things I'll tease out: historical perspective and history. The last few years have moved us up into the top 10 of some really cool historical things like time at number one, weeks at number one, weeks in the top 10, weeks in the top five. And we do have a top five start here again. So that's part of our history. So yay us. We have the 30 game home winning streak or whatever to protect. And that looks like it's most at threat when we get to the Alabama game. Um, and right now, the other thing you might want to just say, I'll just throw this out in case I don't get to it. Texas, by being ranked number one, they are just behind us in most weeks all time ranked at number one. We're at 54 and they're at 49, and they're starting the season ranked number one, so they get a week right there. So in a way, while it might not be so great for the SEC to have Texas take a loss at Ohio State and the Big Ten will keep growing, as a Georgia history fan, and you want to have bragging rights in Georgia, having Texas knocked off that number one spot, may help preserve our lead. Because Texas is close, and then behind Texas, there's really nobody else. So we can hold on to the number nine spot all time in most weeks ranked number one for a lot longer if Texas does not stay ranked number one for the next 4 or 5 weeks. So okay. Well, again, this is the Daily Dog podcast. We've taken a look at where we stand in the SEC and the national rankings and what people's perspective of us is going into the season. So we'll be updating that as we go throughout the year. I think tomorrow what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a little bit more about Gunner Stockton and just take that apart a little bit as we get going. So hope you have a great day. Thanks so much for listening. This is the Daily Dog podcast, and please share the website and podcast with any friends and people who are dog fans so we can have a bigger, wider conversation. Thanks so much. And go dogs.